The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and Assalamu alaikum. I am Kashif Kamran and I welcome you to this short webinar, which is about how you should be preparing yourself for the AAA exams in September 2019. Now, this is a big question 2 weeks before your exams. This is a very challenging time and a very critical time for all of you. And you all must be facing many issues, many challenges. Exactly what you should be doing in the next 2 weeks or what you should be focusing on in the next 2 weeks is a big question. Now, 2 weeks before the exam is a very panic time and is a very stressful time. But utilizing these 2 weeks effectively is very, very important. And every day from now onwards really matters and really counts. Let's discuss some of the good ways which can really improve your chances of success in the September 2019 exams for advanced audit and assurance. Now, when you're preparing yourself for exams for AAA for September 2019, what you should be doing. Now, before I come on the likelihoods, what can come and what cannot come, I need to put a very, very strong disclaimer. And this very strong disclaimer is that you cannot be selective about syllabus. You cannot be selective about that I should do something and I should not do something. You should first complete your syllabus. And then, yes, in the last 10 days, in the last 12 days, when you need to revise things up, you can then focus on revising the more important things. But first, ensure or assure that you complete 100% syllabus. So this is not like a spotting of areas or question spottings, which is too dangerous for a paper like AAA. But yes, based upon certain practices, certain predictable trends, you may know that what is more likely, but you cannot ignore a syllabus area. You need to do your 100% syllabus. And in the last 10 to 12 days, then you can prioritize the more important areas for your revision. So when you sit down and revise, you can revise the more important areas which are more likely for coming up in September 2019 exams. So this disclaimer in the inverted commas is very, very important. Now, when I look at the core areas as my exam tips for September 2019 exams, a question on audit risk in the last 10 days of my preparation, again, after completing the entire syllabus, after completing the business risk and after completing the risk of material misstatement, I should have a very strong focus on audit risk. Uh, Questions like June 17 question number 1, June 18 question number 1, and September 18 question number 1 should be my focused questions when I'm preparing and revising my audit risk. Then ethical, professional, and quality control issue. This is not a probability, right? Ethical, professional, and quality control issues is such a fundamental part of exams and is such a regular feature of your 100 marks paper that you cannot even think about omitting this topic. You cannot even think about preparing less for this topic and going to the exam hall. This is such an important syllabus area. A question, June 18 question number 2, June 17 question number 2 and 3 can be really good questions for your mindset and for opening of your mindset in terms of how you should tackle this area in exam paper. Then there is another area which is a regular feature of exams, which is audit report. We know that in the question number 2, there is definitely a question which is on audit report with average of 10 to 15 marks. There can be a reduced focus on critical appraisal. But again, the disclaimer is valid, right? The disclaimer says you need to do the 100% syllabus, right? You can have a reduced focus on critical appraisal, but you can focus more on other aspects of reporting like actions, impact on report. You must have seen the requirements of the reporting question, which asks for matters, actions, impact on report. You can prepare yourself for such types of requirements. Questions like September 18, question number 2A, December 17, question number 5, and June 16, question number 5 can be really good questions for you to practice for your exams in September 19. Then, matters that are communicated to those charged with governance. Just like the last exam sitting, which was in June, the examiner asked for what matters you should communicate to those charged with governance, and those matters need to be identified from the case study. So when you look at the matters that are to be communicated to those charged with governance, obviously those matters will be given in the case study, but you need to identify those matters and you need to tell why those matters should be communicated to those charged with governance. Either they might be significant, either they might be material, either there might be some important deficiency in the internal control system, or it might be a change of an accounting policy, or it might be uh, a wrong accounting treatment. There can be something special in the case study which you think should be brought to the attention of those charged with governance, but you need to tell why. Questions like December 16, question number 2, which did ask for matters that should be communicated to those charged with governance, or questions like December 11, question number 2, which ask for the matters you should be specifically communicating to those charged with governance, can be examples of things you can expect. Evidence in the working paper file, such a typical question, such a regular feature of your exam papers, right? You cannot ignore this area. A question on evidence, the evidence in the working paper file is such a regular feature. June 17, question number 4, December 14, question number 2 can set the tone of your practice. Procedures. Again, an integral part of a 100 marks paper. Finding 100 marks without procedures perhaps is next to impossible. Procedures. Uh, if you want to do practice of procedures, then December 15, question number 1B, December 16, question number 1C, December 17, question number 1C2, September 18, question number 1B are good questions. Then another area, audit of performance information. This looks likely. This is not an area which comes regularly, but this is an area where expectations can be built up, either for September exams or for December exams, that this area will reoccur. You should be good on audit of performance information, and you should do questions like December 14, question 3B, December 15, question 2B, and the June 17, question 3B for your good practice on the area of audit of performance information. Then another area which can be probable, not a regular feature of exams, forensic, ethical and professional issues around forensic audit, and accepting a forensic audit assignment. Because questions like such have come in the past paper on forensic. We know there is an examining team article on forensic even, which tells you about the ethical and professional issues about forensic and accepting a forensic audit assignment, what sort of matters you should be considering accepting a forensic audit assignment. June 11, question number 4, and June 13, question number 2B, and June 15, question number 3C can be really good questions for you to be good on forensic and can respond better if a question like such comes in exam paper. Then the last thing, the recent article which was published on the 7th of August, data analytics. You should be reading this article because you can expect a lot of knowledge coming from this article in September 19 exams, like 10 marks, 12 marks. You can find this in question 3, which is the most experimental question. You might find it in the question number 1 because data analytics also linked with risk assessment. So these are tips. These are tips with a big disclaimer, open inverted commas and close inverted commas. And I've repeated that disclaimer many times. First, go through the 100% syllabus. These are prioritized areas. They can be in the question paper, they cannot be. These are just the thought process. These are just assumptions. And we know assumptions are risky. We know assumptions can be subjective. And it's not necessarily that the actual result comes as per the assumptions taken. But these are exam tips for September 2019 exams, which is one of the most frequently asked questions of the student which areas I should be focusing on. And I've given you the benchmark questions, right, which you should be going down with and going through it. Now, something very important for all of you is where I need to have a very strong focus on when you're preparing yourself for exams and knowing the tips is to focus on the articles, which normally students uh, undermine or which normally students don't read very regularly. When you look at the articles and you look at the core areas, which I just mentioned to you, firstly, there is a batch of articles. I'll divide articles into two parts, right? The first part of the articles is I will refer as batch 1. And in the batch 1, there are exam techniques articles. Exam techniques article, part 1 to part 5. You should be reading these 5 techniques article, part 1 and part 5, which is about risk, about procedures, about ethics, about accounting issues, and about reporting. And we know these are all 5 important areas for exams. Exam techniques article. These are first 5 articles on the website. When you go to the website AAA, technical articles, these are first 5 articles, right? Then in the batch 2, the very first article you will be reading in the batch 2 is the article which is the new article, which is about data analytics. You should be reading this article, which was published on the 7th of August. This is the most recent article, right? Then you should be reading articles around the core areas. Audit of performance information, which is important for exams. Performance information in public sector, that's the title of the article. Performance information in public sector. You should be reading this article. Then you should be reading the article on forensic accounting, because forensic is important for exams in September 19. You should be reading article on the report, which is the new audit report. There is an article which is titled the new audit report. You should read this article because that's another area which is fundamentally very, very important. Then you should be reading an article which is quality control, a perpetual current issue, because quality control is a regular feature of exams. Quality control, a perpetual current issue. You should be reading this article as well. Now, these are articles in batch 2 which are around areas which are highly probable in exam context. And to be good on these areas, you should be reading the batch 2 with 5 articles and batch 1 with 5 articles. Then, when you look at the batch 3 of articles, you cannot ignore articles like corporate governance and its impact on audit practices, because these are knowledge areas, right? And we are not sure which knowledge areas will the examiner capture. Article on professional skepticism, article on non-compliance with laws and regulations, NOCLA, non-compliance with laws and regulations. At least batch 1 with 5 articles, batch 2 with 5 articles, and batch 3 with 3 articles. At least read these articles. And the last one, using the work of internal auditor. So that makes a list of 14 articles. Now you need to analyze yourself. Out of these 14 articles, how many have you read? How many you still need to read? You have 2 weeks. You can still do them. But I believe you must have read these articles, at least most of them or some of them. So you need to see how many are still remaining. So try to ensure that you're going through these articles which have been mentioned on screen. These are at least minimum articles, but you should go through batch 1, batch 2, and batch 3 preparing yourself effectively on the articles. So that's number two, right? So number one, I mentioned in my areas were the core areas. Core areas was my number one focus, then articles was my number two focus, right? Now, moving on to the next thing, third, what you should be doing in the next 14 days to be successful. Now, knowing the core areas, knowing the articles to read, you should then move into the next important thing, which is known as practice. Now, understand what you should be doing in practice. The batch one of practice, the batch one of practice should be the benchmark questions given to you, the benchmark questions given with exam tips. So with exam tips at the beginning of this webinar, with exam tips, I have given you some benchmark questions for each area, which is important for exams in September. So those benchmark questions given with exam tips would be your first priority. Then in the batch two, you should do recent past papers starting from 2018, 2017 and 2016. Ensure that you have gone into these past papers. You have seen questions in 2018, 2017, 2016. You have seen the types of questions which have come in the last 3 years. You have seen how the questions have come in the last 3 years, and you've practiced them. So many benchmark questions are within the 3 years, 16, 17, 18. But apart from those benchmark questions, if some questions have not been recommended as benchmark, you should still complete 2016, 2017, and 2018. These 3 years are very, very important in your batch two. And if you have time, you can go beyond that. If you have time, you can go beyond, you can go to 15, 14, 13. But I'm not recommending 15, 14. In my benchmark questions, I've even recommended 2011 when needed. In my benchmark questions, I've even recommended 2012, 2013 where it is needed. So when you do the benchmark questions, you will be very scattered. But once you complete the benchmark questions, you should do the 3 recent exam papers, 2016, 2017, 2018. In total, that makes 6 past papers. So 6 past papers to be done in the batch 2 practice. Then the next thing you should be knowing when you're practicing is to know the marking scheme, because a lot of time we are unfamiliar with the marking scheme and we do a big disaster in our exam paper. We write more, we write less because we're unaware of the marking scheme. So the marking scheme is the most important thing you should be going through and knowing the marking scheme for exams, right? Now, I have specifically covered the marking schemes for core areas, and I just want to revisit them with all of you so that you have a better understanding of the marking scheme. If I take you back to my presentation and tell you the marking scheme, starting first with the more important area, risk, business risk. If there is a question on business risk, then each business risk is worth 2 marks. This is the most updated marking scheme. If there is a question on audit risk or a risk of material misstatement, then there are 3 marks available for each audit risk and risk of material misstatement, which covers the materiality, the accounting treatment, and the specific risk and the impact on the financial statement. So if you write a risk which has materiality, which has treatment, which has the risk, and which has the impact on the financial statement, then this situation will give you 3 marks. However,